Wonderful. Well, good morning, everybody. We're going to officially start the program now. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Donito Burgess. I'm the Community Engagement Manager here at Tucson Audubon. Today's presentation will be given by my colleague, Aya Pickett. She's the Restoration Project Manager here. We always start off any of our presentations, any of our field trips by reminding people about our mission here at Tucson Audubon. And we are here to inspire people to enjoy and protect birds. And we do that through recreation, through education, conservation, restoration. And we kind of have a twofer for you today. So today's a little bit about education for some of the restoration and conservation work that Aya does. The title of today's presentation is What's Going On at the Empire Ranch Birding Station. Tucson Audubon has been running one of the longest running bird research stations. The Empire Ranch Bird Banding Station has been operating for the last 20 years, and during that time, we've been collecting specific data on individual birds. During this presentation, you're going to learn about the basics of bird banding, the types of birds that are at the station, as well as our plans for incorporating more research and education into our programming. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat. Or just hang on to them and we'll give you an opportunity to do those later in the day. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Aya. And Aya, go ahead and take us away.
Great. Thanks, Danita. That was a really nice introduction. And thanks everyone for being here on this beautiful Tuesday. Nice cool day here in Tucson. One of the last few cool days, I think, before it starts really heating up. So I'm really enjoying it. But really excited to give this presentation to you all today because we haven't really put out a whole lot of information on the Empire Ranch Banding Station yet. I'm going to be kind of going over kind of all the basics of banding and kind of lead up to kind of what's actually happening at the banding station. But we're just going to start with like a nice little intro into banding for anyone who's not really super familiar with bird banding or banding stations. I've been doing it for a long time, so I'm excited to kind of talk about it a little bit today. All right. So first, I just wanted to give a little introduction on me. I've been doing bird work for a long time. This first picture is me with a barred owl. This was one of my first field jobs when I was working in undergrad back in 2016. I was really fortunate to live really close to an active banding station that's happening. So I got some really good field experience as a student really early on that set me up for success kind of like later down into my career as a wildlife professional. From working at that station, this was back in Michigan. This is Michigan State Bird Observatory is what it's called now. Back when I was there, it's called Bird Lake Banding Station. But I worked there for a while, and then once I graduated, I had all this really great experience put on my resume. So from there, I worked at Intermountain Bird Observatory, that's up in Idaho, another banding station where we also collect lots of different field data on birds. I also ran a station in Delaware. I also did a little bit of seabird work in Maine on a seabird island called Metinick Island in Maine. So this picture is me being attacked by a bird. I've been attacked by many birds and pooped on by many birds in my career. One of the joys of being an ornithologist. And in my current position, I run the Empire Ranch Banding Station, and I also run our saguaro project, where we're planting thousands of saguaros across Arizona. And I also do some Montezuma quail work, but today I'm just going to be talking about this banding work that we're doing. So first, just a little brief overview on just banding. What is banding? What does that even mean? What is a band? The whole deal. Okay, so first for banding, we're capturing birds. We're doing this in a passive way. So we set up this net. This is called a mist net. And the idea is basically the birds just can't see it. They fly right into it. We're not really typically baiting it or anything unless you're kind of looking for a specific species to capture. And the birds basically, they kind of hit the net and they fall down into this pocket, just like a little hammock. And they just kind of wait out there until we go and take them out of the net really carefully. And we typically check this like pretty regularly, at least 30 minutes apart. So they're not really hanging out in there for very long. and we monitor it pretty closely just to make sure that the birds are doing well. And then after it's captured, we'll put it in a little cloth bird bag. We'll take it back to the station where we process all of this information. And we'll also put this little aluminum band around it. There's lots of different types of bands. For songbirds, we're going to use these little tiny aluminum bands. And we do that because each of these bands has a unique 9-digit number on it that no other bird will ever get. So if this bird is captured at another station, or it hits a window or someone finds it, then we can always know that this bird was banded on this specific date in this location, so that if it moves around, we can say, whoa, that's some really interesting data that we have. Like when I worked back in Michigan, we banded a bird in Michigan, kind of mid-Michigan area, and then that bird was captured like, I don't remember how long it was later, but it was captured in Belize. So like that's some really interesting data that you can get from that. And you can kind of like get some other data that I'll go over later in this presentation as well. And it's a very light, aluminum is a very light metal, so it's a very lightweight band. And then after we band it, we'll also take a bunch of measurements from it as well. So one of the things we do is we'll measure its wing length and a whole bunch of other things that I'll also get into later. And then the last thing is that we'll just release the bird back into the wild. This whole process shouldn't take more than a couple minutes once we have the bird in the hand. And during this whole process, bird safety is absolutely our #1 priority. We always look at the birds to make sure they're doing well. There are certain things that we can watch for to make sure that they're not being too stressed out. So if it seems like a bird is being stressed out, then we will let it go. We don't want to compromise the bird's safety for taking data. That is absolutely not kind of what we're trying to do. So we always prioritize bird safety during this entire process. And like I was saying, there's different types of bands that you can put on different types of birds. First of all, there's lots of different sizes that you use, and they're really specific to different species. There's a whole book on the types of bands that birds need and the sizes. It's called the Pile Guide. We call it the Banding Bible. It has all of the information on it that you would ever need to know, probably more than you would ever need to know about aging birds and sexing birds and banding them. So typically for songbird banding, we're using these aluminum bands, these guys right here. But for certain projects, you can also use color bands if you're trying to recite an individual that's really small from really far away. And then these ones down on the bottom are bands that are used for hawks that kind of clamp around the sides. But we always make sure that the band is the right fit for the bird. That's something important in thinking about bird safety, right? You don't want to band if it's too big. You don't want to band if it's too small. It's really got to be the perfect size for the bird. So we always make sure that that is being prioritized. And then once the bird is banded and we collected all this data is being used for research, right? We're not doing this for fun. We're not just being like, hey, wouldn't it be cool to go and handle a bird? No, we're doing this for a purpose. We're doing this specifically for research so that we can improve these populations of birds or figure out, what we need to do to like help these populations. So I just wanted to bring up just a couple examples from my experience working as a bird bander. So this first one, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the species. Danito, maybe this is a Texas bird, a really important Texas bird. It's called the golden-cheeked warbler. And I worked on this project where we were banding golden-cheeked warblers, and we were putting these little color bands on their legs because we were tracking them and seeing how well they were doing with nesting. We wanted to make sure that the species was doing really well. This is an endangered species that has a very tiny home range. And a lot of their home range actually is on top of a military base. So this military base basically wanted to say, hey, how well is this species doing? Can we continue using this land? We want to make sure that we're doing everything to make sure the species is doing well, because if it seems like it's not, then that land, military might not be able to use that land anymore. So we're tracking this bird using these bands, and you can kind of track the individual, and the birds come back year after year. So you kind of get to know, oh, the orange band, purple band bird is back again for like the 10th year in a row. Great stuff. Just making sure that they're all doing well so that, yeah, they can continue to use that land and make sure that an endangered species is doing really well. And then also for Tucson Audubon, I don't know if any of you have heard about our Desert Purple Martin project, where we are working with some researchers from Northern Arizona University and from the Purple Martin Conservation Association to band some of these birds. So we're capturing these birds and banding them, and we're taking some measurements from them so that we can figure out, number one, we don't know where Desert Purple Martins winter. So we're putting these little backpacks on them so that we can track their migration onto their wintering grounds. Because once we know that, then we can figure out, okay, so these are the specific areas that we need to conserve on their wintering ground, right? So that really helps us kind of understand how to conserve the species. And then we're also taking some DNA samples from these guys to see potentially if they could be their own species. Because if they're their own species, that would potentially open them up to more federal protections. So that would really help this bird a lot if we can kind of prove that it's its own species, because it is very distinct from the other two species of desert purple martins. I could talk a lot more on that, but I'm gonna let that go for now. But yeah, but we also always put the band on them. Every time we catch a bird, we always put a band on it. And then we always know that we've caught that individual at this certain time. So if we have it in the hand, we might as well put a band on it. Okay. So yeah, just to kind of sum all of that up, that's a lot of information I'm throwing at you guys. So just trying to give a little summary here. Banding can be used to study species of concern. It can place new federal protections on certain species. And then it also can help protect habitats. We're using all this data to say, hey, this area looks really good for them. Maybe we should really prioritize conserving this area because we have collected all this data that shows us that it's a really great spot for them. Okay. So now moving on to banding stations. We talked a little bit about banding and just kind of like some different projects that you can do for it. Banding stations are a little bit different because they are long-term projects. You're doing the same thing in the same areas and you're collecting the same data year after year in kind of a little bit of a different way than some of those other projects. So at a banding station, you're pretty much staying in the same location year after year. You're putting these nets in the same spots year after year. And you're doing it at the same dates, at the same times, and you're taking the same measurements year after year. And by doing that, we can start to say, hey, look at all this data we've collected. Look at how these populations are changing over time, right? So it's a really long-term process that takes like at least 5 years to kind of start seeing these trends. And this up in the corner is where I worked in Intermountain Bird Observatory. This is one of the banding stations that I really love. And I'll probably talk about them more because they're like one of my favorite places in this world. So so for a banding station, you can kind of focus on a couple different seasons that kind of align with bird biology, right? If you're a birder, you probably have an understanding of what some of these seasons are. So you can band during the spring/summer, the breeding season. You could do a fall migration station. This is primarily most of the work that I've done in the past has been fall seasons, and that's a really interesting thing to watch because you start at the beginning of the season and you get different species all throughout the year. So it's like really fun because you never really know what you're going to get in the fall. So everything's moving through, always getting different stuff. And then you can do a winter banding season on the wintering grounds. And then, or you could do a spring migration banding season. Or some stations do a combination of these things, but they typically focus on just kind of studying one of these things. And banding stations, what do we band at banding stations? So most of the work I've done has been songbird banding. Empire Ranch banding station is a songbird banding station. But there are also other banding stations that you might encounter. So you could also go to a hawk banding station or an owl banding station. And those use different protocols than songbirds. They have different biologies, so you kind of have to pay attention to those when you're capturing different species of birds. Owls, for example, is completely nocturnal. When I worked at Intermountain Bird Reservatory, they did all three of these. That would all happen during different times of the day. So we'd have songbirds in the morning, we'd have raptors during the day, and then owls at night. So kind of like 24/7 banding, pretty much, which was really interesting. And then you can also do hummingbird banding. Hummingbird banding is a really specialized thing, requires really specialized licensing, really specialized bands. You actually have to make your own bands for hummingbird banding, really, really, really tiny. But yeah, we sometimes catch them, but at Empire Ranch, but typically we do not band them, or we don't band them at all, rather, because we don't have those licenses, and I don't know how to make hummingbird bands, so we just take some data from them and let them go, but we do catch them sometimes. And then in addition to collecting all this data on different types of birds at banding stations, there's also a couple other things that we also do simultaneously at a banding station. The first one is we always record all the birds that we see or hear at the banding station. Those can be kind of different than our banding totals because we're probably not going to catch something like a turkey vulture, right? We're never going to catch a turkey vulture in one of our mist nets. They fly way, way up high. They don't come down low, really low enough for our nets. Our nets are only about 9 to 10 feet ish high, so they're not going way up in the sky. We're not going to catch a turkey vulture, but we will record that down just so we have that data and we're getting a full species assessment of the area that we're in. A lot of banding station will incorporate education into their programs as well. I'm really a huge fan of this. I think that banding stations are a really great way of like seeing birds up close and really learning about kind of like their aging and sexing and kind of like all this research that's happening. Yeah, and it's really cool for people to come, I think, and kind of interact with scientists face to face. There aren't really a whole lot of experiences where you can just go up to someone's science research project and say, hey, show me everything that you're doing. But, you know, banding is a really good tool for that. So really connecting people with science. And then our last thing on here that I put is just contributing to other research. So when I worked in Michigan, we were also collecting poop samples from our birds. And using these poop samples, we could look at the color of them and we could say, oh, this color looks really similar to this other berry. So we could kind of identify what they were eating based on their poop samples because we were already collecting these birds. So we could kind of see what they're eating. And a lot of what they were eating while I was there was like some non-native stuff. So they were starting to prefer some of the non-native over the native stuff. So that's kind of some interesting data to think about, especially when we're like managing these habitats and planting stuff. What are these birds eating? What can we put in more of? What should we take out, right? So that all helps us in conserving bird populations. And here's some of the data we collect at a banding station. It's a lot of different things, but primarily we're going to look at species. First of all, we're never going to put a band on a bird without knowing its species. We also look at its age, its sex, wing length, mass, breeding characteristics. That's kind of an interesting one, especially for a breeding season banding station. We look for two things. One is a brood patch. That's this picture down here of this, what I think is a great tit actually, but I'm not really the expert on European/Eurasian birds, so that could be wrong. But what this picture is showing is a brood patch. It's basically when a bird is incubating a nest, it will lose all of the feathers on its stomach so that it can give those eggs more heat more directly. So instead of feather or skin, feather, egg, it's just skin to egg contact. That's a lot warmer than feather, skin to feather to egg contact. So it'll lose all those feathers so it can incubate those eggs a little bit more efficiently. And then the other breeding characteristic is a cloacal protuberance, which is just enlarged male parts. And that's all I'm going to say about that. And then the last thing we also look at is fat. Similar to kind of how we look for brood patch, you can also look through a bird's skin, just looking at it. It will have different colors on it based on what its muscle color looks like and what its fat color looks like. And its fat will be this like orangey color. And we love seeing fat on migrating birds because that means they have lots of energy to do these long migrations. So fat can be an indicator of a migrating bird, which is really interesting to see. Okay, and this is just our data sheet that we use. It seems like a lot, but once you really get practiced with it and really good with it, it shouldn't take you more than a couple of minutes to fill this whole thing out. So we, I don't want to go over everything in this, but just to kind of give you an idea of all the data we're collecting. We're making sure we're writing down the band number for the individual. Very important. Most important thing that you need to write down is the band number, species, the age, sex. Here's all that breeding information right here, cloacal protuberance and brood patch, but tons of other stuff in there as well that I'm happy to answer questions on this, but too much information for me to go over in just this presentation. Okay, so there's banding and banding stations. And now I'm going to move into our banding station, the one that Tucson Audubon is in charge of, and that's the Empire Ranch banding station. So we haven't always run the station. Last year was actually our first year operating the station, but like Danita was saying, it's been running for 22 years, and previously it was being run by the Bureau of Land Management. They had some folks out there that were doing the work for a really long time, retired, and then they didn't have other people to take it over. A lot of this is a lot of banding is just really specialized skills that you have to learn over years. And so they asked us if we would have anyone to take it over, and that was me. And so yeah, I took this station over with one of the people from Sonoran Joint Venture, Adam, and we only took over the Empire Ranch banding station because that's kind of what our funding would allow at the time. But there was another station that they also ran in the past called the San Pedro banding station. But we're only going to focus on just the Empire Ranch one today, since that's the one we've been working on so far. And okay, so this is a little bit dry, but I'll just go over this quickly. So the Empire Ranch station, we're running it the same way that it's been running for the last 22 years. And they run on this specific protocol called MAPS, and that stands for Monitoring Avian Productivity and Survival. It's a breeding season data protocol. And because you're taking data during the breeding season, you get a really good representation of adults and newly fledged birds. And you can use those ratios to kind of study how these populations are changing over time. And we run 10 nets for this protocol, and it's only once every 10-ish days, so we're not doing it every day. It's very spaced out. And in total, I think we only run about 10 days for the whole time. So 10 days spaced 10 days apart, essentially, is what we're doing. So it's not really a whole lot. And yeah, we're just doing the same thing that they've always done, operating the same net locations during the same times of day, during the same times of year, so we can get that really nice replicated study that we can compare year to year. And this is all run by Institute for Bird Populations. They run a whole lot of banding programs, and they also, when we submit the data, Institute for Bird Populations can also use that data in their research. And they have tons of research articles on their website if you're ever interested in looking through all of that, but there's lots. And just to give you an idea of kind of who does MAPS banding, who's a part of this protocol, all of these green little pointers in here, these are all the MAP stations that are out there. So lots of people. We're one of the farthest south of all of them. It's pretty fun. Okay, and over the last 20 years, we've captured over 100 species. Does anyone want to guess in the chat what our most common species is? Give a little time, think it over. I'll give you some guesses. So it's in Las Ciénegas National Conservation Area. We are under this cottonwood grove where there's a little stream running around it. But the whole other area around it is grassland. Yeah, what else can I say? And this is during the breeding season. We're only capturing small songbirds, nothing bigger than a flicker. Flickers are pretty big. Yeah, if you want to give any guesses in the chat, or you can say it out loud too. Any guess is okay. I just like hearing people say species that they know, honestly. House finch, that's a good guess, honestly. I think that in a lot of places, house finch would probably, even though song sparrow is another good one. It's a good one. Yeah, those are some really good guesses. I like these. Here, I'll give our top 5. I worked really hard on these slides. I really like them. Okay. So, top 5 most common species that we see at Empire Ranch. Starting with number 5. Oh, hold on. What's happening to my slide? Oh no, it's frozen. Okay, here we go. Sorry. All right. So number 5, yellow-breasted chat. Really fun bird. Make all sorts of vocalizations. Typically not in the hand, but really fun bird just to see. Blue grosbeak. There are lots of blue grosbeaks. I really like blue grosbeaks. I've worked with other types of grosbeaks at other banding stations, rose-breasted in Michigan and black-headed in Idaho. And I will say that blue grosbeaks are the nicest out of the grosbeaks. All grosbeaks have this huge seed-crushing bill, which is really good for pinching fingers. And rose-breasted and black-headed really know how to use that. But I will say blue grosbeak, not the worst grosbeak to handle. So yay, blue grosbeak. Big fan. Still bites sometimes, but relatively not. We also catch yellow warbler. Another really fun species. I love all warblers. They're so beautiful. Lucy's warbler, which is really fun. We're probably one of the only banding stations out there to catch this many Lucy's warblers just based on their range. Like no one else is probably doing that. Makes it kind of interesting for us. Really interesting potential research project out there for someone if anyone wants to study Lucy's warblers or knows a warbler scientist. And then number 1, it's common yellowthroat. Yeah, common yellowthroats, super fun birds. Another really cool warbler. We also catch tons of common yellowthroats in Michigan. So they're a species I'm very familiar with. We get a lot of them. So yeah, common yellowthroats. But thank you everyone for submitting your guesses. We also catch house sparrows and house finches and song sparrows at this station. They didn't make it into our top 5, but good guess. Okie doke. And then just some other fun, notable species that we catch sometimes. Occasionally we will catch a yellow-billed cuckoo. We have not caught that many in the history of this station. But kind of a fun species because here in Arizona it's an endangered species. We also catch hummingbirds sometimes. We don't ban them, but we take all the same information from them as other species. And then last year we caught a Cooper's hawk, which is our first Cooper's hawk of the entire station's history. So that was pretty fun. And then, sorry, I know I'm like kind of getting close to time here, but I'll kind of like try to go quickly through just some of our future goals. One is that we want to really collaborate with more researchers. This year, we're going to be working with the Bird Genoscape Project and a PhD student from the University of Arizona. The Bird Genoscape Project basically looks at feather samples taken from specific species, and using that DNA, they can pinpoint where the breeding locations of certain species are, so they can kind of see distinct different populations of the same species. So for common yellowthroat, for example, there's these these 5 different populations based on this data. And they found that this little red population down here, I believe, is in declining status. So even though common yellowthroat, really widespread bird to find around, really common, certain populations aren't doing as well as other ones. So it's kind of interesting to see where those specific populations are migrating and if those are the same as the other populations. I think often they are not. And then we're also working with a tick researcher from the U of A who's looking at ticks on birds and the potential diseases they might carry and how those birds are carrying these ticks and potentially spreading some of these diseases. So some really interesting data that they're getting from them. We'll be looking at ticks on birds this year. Training future wildlife professionals is another thing that I really hope to be doing in the future. This is how I got my start when I was an undergrad. So, and it was really helpful to me when I was first establishing my career. So I'm really hoping to kind of provide some of those opportunities to others with the station. Since, you know, we have it here, we might as well like do as much good as we can with it, I think. Also hosting educational events, kind of talked about that a little bit already. Restarting the San Pedro banding station. That was run historically, but has not been reopened just because of funding constraints. And then potentially even starting a winter banding program. There is another sister program to our MAPS program called MOSI, and that's specifically for looking at migrants on their wintering grounds. And this is a map of where all of the current MOSI stations are. You can see that they go all the way from kind of our area here in Arizona all the way down to South America. So we would be one of the farthest north stations of everyone, which I think would be kind of interesting. There is one station that's a little bit close to us, but I did look at them on the map, and I think they are a distinctly different ecosystem type than what we're at. So I think that would be kind of interesting to compare some of that data. And then the last one is to recruit more volunteers, so we're able to do more of the stuff that we want to do that I listed. Currently, our staffing is only 2 people for 10 nets, which is doable, but when you want to have more educational events and do more training with more people, that just kind of, it makes it harder for us to do the basics of what we need to do and run the banding station. So we are trying to recruit some volunteers, and we're doing that by putting together this banding workshop that I have posted on our volunteer page. It's going to be at the end of this month, 4 days, just in the mornings. It's going to be here in Tucson at our Mason Center. And the last day, we'll actually be going down to our site on Las Ciénegas just to see kind of the site, get familiar with it, see where our nets are located, and all that good stuff. It's going to be a combination of lectures and hands-on skills. So one of the things I really want us to get familiar with is this data sheet. I know when people say, oh, like data recording, oh, that's so easy. And then they look at this data sheet and they're like, oh my gosh, what is all of this stuff on here? I didn't sign up for this. So really getting really good idea of everything that's on this data sheet, how to fill it out, what to do, because it is a lot. But we'll also be doing some work with mist nets and bird handling. I'm going to be teaching this with bird safety absolutely in mind first, because that always comes before all of our research. So handling safely, taking birds out of nets safely, and then we'll get a little bit into banding as well. But yeah, just really trying to get everyone on the same page, because it's really hard to train people when we're only banding once every 10 days. So trying to condense some of this stuff so we all get on the same page before our season starts. Yeah, and this is also limited to 10 participants. I'm really sorry I had to do it. There's only 2 of us that can train and hands-on. I just really wanted to make sure that everyone had the opportunity to like set up nets and get some of these hands-on skills. So I am limiting it. We're going to be choosing people just based on their availability to help with the station, because that is our priority, right? We want people to be helping with our station so that we can do some of the things that we want to do. And we're also going to be looking at kind of what your previous experience was with bird banding, and yeah, be taking some of that into consideration, just so we know how to like structure the class and how much we need to teach. So if you're interested in any of that, we have it set up on our volunteer page. There is a link to the workshop. I put the link to it up in the top corner. I'm not sure if you can see that, but you just look up Tucson Audubon and look at our volunteer page. It'll be right on there. It's called Bird Banding 101 Workshop. This is what it looks like. There's a little section down here that says, please read. Would appreciate if you would read that. Has some details in it. And then we also, within this link, there is a sign up form for you to sign up, put in some of your information so you can be contacted about it. This is the form that you will fill out. That is a part of that link. And thank you. Sorry, I went a little over, I think.
And also, thank you so much, Ian. Just real quick to follow up on that, I'll include a link when I send out the email to everybody today. I'll make sure to put that volunteer link to the bird banding so that they can find it really easily as well. And so I have a couple of questions for you. So yeah, hopefully if anybody else has any questions, like I said, feel free to put them in the chat. But one thing I was curious about is, do you band every species that y'all capture? Or are there some species that, just for lack of a better phrase, you really don't have any kind of interest in tracking?
Yeah, so we do band every species that we capture, with the exception of hummingbirds. We do catch hummingbirds every once in a while, but we don't ban them because they require those specific permits, those specific bans, and we just do not have the capacity to do that right now. And so we ban pretty much everything we capture. Our nets, you can get different mesh size mist nets depending on what kind of birds you're working with. Our nets are specifically designed for smaller songbirds. So we're pretty much only capturing those, smaller songbirds and banding those. So pretty much, I would say blue jay, or I guess we're here in Tucson. I'm from the east, so I think of blue jay as our biggest bird, but maybe northern flicker would probably be our biggest. Yeah, good question. Or white-winged dove. White-winged dove. Yeah, white-winged dove is our biggest. They're chunky guys.
And then also too, the picture of the bird that had the ticks on it made me think of this. Do y'all do any sort of treatment to if you find a sick or injured bird, or do you just band it and just kind of let nature do what nature was going to do naturally? How do y'all kind of approach that?
Yeah, for sick and injured birds, I guess it kind of depends. If they are sick, we'll pretty much just release it back into the wild. Typically, it's better to just release them back into the wild than to try to bring them to a rehab center that for us would be like an hour away, and a bird is just like rumbling around in a car for an hour and like probably getting more stressed than like if we just let it go and do its thing. And they do heal up pretty fast. So I would say typically we would just let it go. But if it did seem like if it had disease, like if it had pox on it or something like that, we would disinfect our tools to make sure we're not spreading that disease.
And then Laura has a question in the chat. She asks, do you typically band on certain days of the week every 10-ish days, or how do you do that?
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. Because it's once every 10 days, ish, it makes it a little bit difficult. Also, like I have other obligations and Adam also has other obligations. We take PTO sometimes, so that we don't have to work all the time. So we are doing a lot of Thursday days this year. Our days are still a little bit tentative, but if you are interested in figuring out what days we're planning on having available, it is on that form that I listed. So if you go onto that volunteer page and look at that form, I actually have all the tentative days on there. I think we have a lot of Thursdays, but not consistent.
And then also another question from Fonda is, they say years ago they were able to watch banding at Pasayampa. I'm sorry. I'm probably mispronouncing that. They thought it was really fascinating, and we're just curious if there are any plans to offer viewing opportunities for bird banding. So maybe not even if they're getting necessarily into it, but maybe just want to see what it's all about.
Yes, that is a great question. Something I actually didn't go over. I would really love to have some public days on our calendar. Since we're going to have some volunteers that are getting trained up, basically, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page and we all feel comfortable with having volunteers come out. Especially when you're learning, sometimes you're like, I don't want to watch someone like as I don't want someone to watch me extract this bird as I'm still learning it. So I want to make sure that everyone's comfortable with that. But I really do hope that we'll have some public days up on our calendar in the future, but not planned out yet.
All right, thank you. And then Meg asks, are there any species that you're particularly hoping to catch? You know, do you have any target species? And then a couple questions. Have you ever caught any meadowlarks? They've done some eastern meadowlark banding. And then third question is, how many species, you know, do you typically band in a season?
Oh, those are all good questions. And you're probably going to have to repeat some of those to me. But starting with, sorry, can you repeat?
Target species. Like, do you have any necessarily target
Oh,
species or ones that you're really hoping to gather data on?
really, this is just, you know, the goal of it is really just to see what's there. So I don't really have any specific target species. There are species that I would love to see. Meadowlark would be very cool. I don't think that we've ever caught a meadowlark. It's kind of interesting, even though we're in Las Ciénegas and we have all these grassland birds around us, they don't seem to really come down into where we're banding. Like, yeah, we don't catch meadowlark, we don't catch like shrike or anything like that, but shrike would be really cool. I see shrikes all the time when I'm at Las Ciénegas. I think that would be a really cool one. I'd be afraid for my fingers a little bit, but that would be pretty cool. Yeah. And then which one did I not?
How many, like, just how many species do y'all typically band down there in a season?
I am gonna have to look back at my numbers. I think per day we catch around 40 per day. So we're not like a super high volume banding station, especially since it's breeding season. I think breeding seasons typically tend to be a little bit more low volume than some of the migration stations I've worked at. Like some of the migration stations I worked at, like when birds are migrating through, they come through in these big flocks, and sometimes you have just like busy days where it's like all hands on deck. Like we got to start closing nets because there are so many birds that are flying in, and that is not our vibe. It's pretty chill. 40 bird day is a pretty chill day for us.
Excellent. Well, I believe that's all the questions in the chat, and I'll stop asking all my questions. I can grab you in the cafeteria or library anytime and ask you.
Yeah, absolutely. Love answering questions about banding.
Yeah, but just more than anything, wanted to thank everybody for being here. Obviously, I want to thank you, Aya, for giving this presentation. I learned a lot. I hope everybody got a lot out of it as well. And then to those of you who are here today, just again, I know I said it at the beginning, but look for an email today, a little bit later in the afternoon from me. It will have a link to this presentation. So if you missed anything or had to step away, or if you want to share it with somebody, please feel free to do that. And then also in that same email, I will, like I said, I'll include the link to where you can look at and sign up for Aya's banding workshop that's going to be taking place at the end of this month into next month. And so with that, the last thing we always like to do at the end of all of our presentations is I invite everybody to unmute yourself and thank Aya personally. This was a great presentation. I hope we all learned a lot. I know I definitely did. So thank you, Aya. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Aya.
Thank
Thanks
you,
everyone
Aya.
for
That's
coming.
terrific.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry I can't come to the workshop.
Oh no, that's okay. Maybe we'll have a public banding day and you can come out then.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, thank you all again so much. Thank you for helping us further our mission of enjoying and protecting birds. And I hope to see you all out birding or on another one of our virtual events soon. All right. Thanks and take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.